very much, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I have a slightly different view than my colleagues Trevor Mallard and Darian Fenton, which may be because perhaps I'm a newer MP and just don't understand it. But when we look at Clause 3 being the Principal Act amended, yes, of course, this is an amendment to the Employment Relations Act, and so I guess it is right. But to me, the changes are so fundamental in several places in this bill that actually it fundamentally undermines the Employment Relations Act. It doesn't amend it. Amend it sounds quite, kind of normal really and quite moderate, but it fundamentally undermines a number of the key objects of the Employment Relations Act. And that Act was designed to build productive employment relationships. That is a fundamental object of this Act, to build productive employment relationships through the promotion of good faith in all aspects of the employment environment and of the employment relationship. So, in fact, there are a number of elements in this amendment bill that fundamentally alter the balance of power in the relationship. And, as my colleague Stuart Nash said, don't deal with things like dignity and respect. When you can dismiss somebody for any reason that you can come up with, and they have no right to even know why you dismissed them, let alone challenge that dismissal if it's not fair, no right of redress, then I don't think that's about a relationship. That is fundamentally altering this legislation, the Employment Relations Act. It also the objects of the Act talk about good faith behaviour, as I've said, but also actually explicitly acknowledging and addressing the inherent inequality of power in employment relationships. And so I think that has been completely ignored by the amendments in this bill, and members opposite seem to think there is no inequality in the employment relationship. It is absolutely true that there is, that a young worker, and many of the people who will immediately get hit by the 90 days extension to all workplaces will be young people entering a job for the first time. That is assuming, of course, they can get one, which in the current environment is very difficult. But let's say they do get one. Then they are immediately in a situation where they have no rights at work. Now, you cannot tell me in the situation of high unemployment, when they don't know their rights, that and they're not a union member, that they are going to be able to get advice about whether or not they should accept this 90 days of no rights. And in fact, it would seem that the intention of those opposite is that the normal course of events will be take it or leave it employment agreements, where it will be perfectly legitimate to advertise a job as having a 90-day rights-free period, and in fact presenting the person with the option of either taking the employment agreement that has no rights for the first 90 days or not, and not having a job. That is not a free choice, and it is not an equal power relationship. So as I say, I am a little concerned that the Principal Act amended, it worries me, because I think that this is more than a minor amendment to the Employment Relations Act. I think this is a fundamental undermining. In fact, I could kind of understand it more if it was the Employment Contracts Act. Then you might say, OK, well, the Principal Act, the Employment Contracts Act, if it had not been repealed, a very good thing I might add, was being amended by things like the change to the access provisions, which actually would be not as bad as what was in the Employment Contracts Act. So you could say that was an amendment, but I tell you what, actually the 90 days issue is way worse than what existed under the Employment Contracts Act under the last National Government, because actually workers did have rights to challenge unfair dismissals within the first 90 days of employment under the Employment Contracts Act, but under this they will not. So it does really worry me that we are, as Mr Nash ended his contribution by saying, we are not building the productive employment relationships that in fact are envisaged by and are the fundamental object of the Employment Relations Act. Productive employment relationships. Those productive employment relationships are what we need We need those productive employment relationships to change the nature of work, to lift workplace productivity and to actually get the sort of economic growth that this country needs. And that will rest on a well-informed workforce, a workforce treated with respect, a workforce that has collective voice. Mr Chair.
Thank you, Mr Chair.